The electronic scoreboard flashes red X after red X. The best Marine snipers just failed the 100-target gauntlet. Dust hangs in the air. Then she steps forward. Arya Cade. Pale hair, simple combat shirt, calm eyes. "Can I borrow your rifle for a minute? One click on the windage? Precise?" A sniper laughs. "This isn't Instagram." She doesn't answer. She lies down, breath steady if she hits one. "I'll shut up." The screen fades to black. Music builds like pressure. They said no one could ever clear all 100. What happened next? Rewrote the definition of perfect. Before we begin, tell us where are you watching from, and if you believe honor and courage still matter, help keep their legacy alive. The screen goes black for half a breath. A metallic clang blooms across the range. Then the scoreboard washes pure green. 100 squares light as one impossible, then undeniable. Wind lifts dust in slow ribbons over Dry Creek Range. Marines fall quiet, eyes pulled toward the lone shooter easing off the trigger. Arya Cade exhales once, smooth as a tide going out. Rewind minutes. Red X's still crowded the board. The best team had stalled at 67. Colonel Hart watched from the tower, arms folded, a pillar of quiet judgment. "Can I borrow your rifle for a minute?" Arya asked. Sergeant Mason's M40A6 sat ready. Clean, loyal, a touch proud. She checked the glass, pressed the turret, and said almost to herself, "2 clicks off." Mason's jaw hardened, then loosened. He knew the night's wind had pushed him and he'd never walked it back. Hart lifted 2 fingers. Proceed. No lecture. No speech. The range preferred proof. Arya set a paper wind feather in the sand and laid in behind the rifle. Cross-eye dominant. She shifted to her off shoulder like it was her first language. 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out. 4 hold the breath box that steadied a city. The Centurion gauntlet locked in 100 pop-ups, 2 to 900 meters, 1 continuous string. Wind would pivot, targets would lie, time would not miss once. The board burned you in red. Target at 200. Arya favored right a whisper, rode the natural respiratory pause, and pressed through the wall. Green, reset. Next. 300 rose before the echo had faded. Mirage flattened. Angle shifted 2 degrees. She refused the dials and held in reticle. Green again, no drama, no waste. By 10, the rhythm had a pulse. Brass fell in a measured cadence, not thrown but released, like each case had a landing script. Diaz, the Marine who'd been filming, forgot to press record. At 20, the fringe gusts arrived, shallow and stubborn. She split holds 0.4 right to 0.6 half a breath earlier than the flag suggested. The plate rang center. Mason uncrossed his arms without noticing. A hot casing bounced, skipped, and kissed the inside of her forward bipod leg. If it lodged there, the next reload would torque the rifle offline. Arya checked the phone set at 45 degrees, a mirror for blind spots, saw the glint, nudged the leg 1 millimeter, and never left the scope. 30 targets. Her cheek weld never wandered. The rear bag rose and fell like it shared her lungs. Someone whispered, "She isn't fighting the wind, she's letting it talk." The range gave her a test at 450, flickering mirage. Grass blades arguing with the flag. Ground wind lied. Target wind told the truth. She weighted the far layer, favored 0.4 right high, and tapped steel dead center. Mason edged closer, professional pride now stripped to curiosity. He'd taught domination dial, force, control because that kept young shooters safe from doubt. Arya was teaching stillness that didn't ask permission. 50 targets lit the board into a green spine. The crowd's breath synchronized with her holds, the oldest choir in the world, counting wind. Hart's expression tilted from audit to interest. Then the range tried to make her hurry. Pop-ups came faster, distances staggered, the kind of sequence that chews seconds and steals posture. Arya shortened nothing. She only erased motion she didn't need. A 600-meter plate flashed on edge, a dare in sheet steel. She waited for half a wind cycle, read the lull, and pressed during silence rather than sound. The ring was lower, heavier, the kind that makes grown shooters blink. 60 became 70 with no red. Diaz finally remembered his camera and kept it low. Superstition is a language too. Mason glanced at the scoreboard, then at Arya's non-moving hands, and the lesson began writing itself. At 80, sweat gathered at Arya's brow, but not by accident. She'd placed a narrow band to catch the drop just shy of her eye line. The bolt cycled as the drop fell. Neither interfered with the other. 90 came on like a weather front. Somewhere behind the line, a boot scuffed, a breath caught, a prayer didn't dare speak. Arya's world narrowed to reticle, rhythm, and the small truth of a trigger breaking clean. 99. The final target would be 900 with a 4-second window, but that was a problem for a future sentence. For now, one more plate, one more hold, one more conversation with the air. She pressed, released, and ghosted the bolt forward like signing a name she didn't need to say. Green bloomed again. The range remembered to make noise. Up in the tower. Hart leaned in, a fraction closer to the railing. Mason didn't smile. He learned. Arya settled deeper, eyes steady. The last square still asleep on the board. 0 isn't a number, she whispered to the rifle. It's a conversation. And the wind, for once, seemed content to answer. Silence held longer than any applause could. The scoreboard glowed steady green, its reflection trembling on brass casings scattered across the mat. Arya lifted her cheek from the stock, clearing the chamber with a deliberate pull and click that sounded almost like a heartbeat calming down. Colonel Hart descended from the tower, boots measured against gravel. Mason waited halfway, jaw set, pride and disbelief wrestling behind his eyes. She corrected my 0, he admitted quietly, and the words carried farther than he intended. Hart studied Arya like she was a cipher he needed to decode. You understand you just broke a course designed to be impossible, Arya replied with calm certainty. It was never impossible. Just misread. The range technician arrived running, clutching a tablet full of telemetry data. Every line confirmed what the crowd already knew: 100 hits, time under limit, no irregularities. The impossible now had coordinates, and they all led to her. Mason stepped forward, extending a hand still rough from recoil and sand. Teach me that two-favor technique, he said. Arya shook it once. It's not about the number, it's about listening longer than you shoot. The air shifted again. Respect had replaced spectacle. Marines gathered around as Hart gave a short nod. Let's see if you can pass it on. The next morning dawned cooler, wind sliding across the firing line in uneven pulses. 50 Marines stood ready, the same men who'd failed the gauntlet days before. Arya moved down the line, tapping rifle barrels lightly, adjusting bipods by millimeters. Don't fight the rifle, she said. Let it breathe with you. Each correction was subtle, a cloth tape strip here, a trigger reset there. Her voice never rose, but every word carried the weight of proof. They began the new drill, 50 targets instead of 100. Not perfection, just practice. The first volley cracked downrange, uneven, tense. Stop. Arya raised a hand, listening more than watching. You're fighting the clock, not the target. She knelt beside one Marine, adjusted his elbow. Whispered, now breathe in rhythm, not command. The second volley told a different story. Hits climbed. Misses fell away like dead leaves in wind. Even Mason, observing from the tower, found himself unconsciously matching her breathing pattern. At lunch, the Marines gathered around the benches, sweat and disbelief mixing in laughter. Diaz asked the question everyone wanted answered. How long did it take you to get this good? Arya looked up from cleaning the bolt. I'm not this good. I'm this practiced. The line hit them harder than any recoil. That afternoon she brought out a thermal scope and a small bag of chalk powder. Wind isn't one thing, she said, dusting the air in front of the muzzles. It's layers. Ground wind, mid-wind, target wind, they rarely agree. The powder drifted into thin, glowing currents, swirling in separate directions. Arya traced them with the scope, showing how temperature and terrain twist truth. Don't fight them. Decide which one matters most for your bullet. The Marines tried again, eyes newly aware of invisible motion. Their groups tightened, shots steadier, breaths slower, confidence, once fragile, began to hold shape. By sunset, they were hitting 70% of their targets. Not perfect, but consistent and real. Mason climbed down from the tower, eyes alive again. "You changed my entire program in 3 days," he said. Arya packed her gear without pausing, because it was built on fighting. Fighting wastes energy. He nodded slowly, almost smiling. "You're teaching cooperation with physics with everything," she said simply. "Wind, time, yourself, heart." Watching from a distance, recognized the rarest kind of authority, the quiet kind. The kind that never demanded obedience but earned it. Later that night, in the empty record room, the technician filed Arya's result into the permanent log. First perfect Centurion string verified, witnessed, signed. He paused before sealing the folder, adding 3 words she'd never written herself: teach the rhythm. Outside, the range lights flickered off one by one. Arya stood by the fence, wind brushing past her hair like an old friend. Mason joined her there, holding 2 coffee cups. "You staying on as instructor, I'll stay as long as they need me," she said. "And when they don't, then I've done my job." He looked out over the empty lanes, still haunted by echoes of brass and steel. "You made silence louder than every shot we fired." Arya smiled faintly. "That's what silence is for." The night swallowed the rest of their words, leaving only the hum of crickets and distant flag snaps. Tomorrow the Marines would shoot again, and this time, the wind would have company by the 5th morning. The air above Dry Creek shimmered like glass. The Marines stood in formation, rifles ready, but the silence felt different now, expectant, not skeptical. Arya walked the line, eyes calm, posture loose, the same way she had before her perfect run. 50 targets again, Hart announced from the tower. Same wind conditions, no resets. He wanted proof that her methods worked beyond chance. Arya nodded once. "They're ready." The first volley cracked through the air, dust plumed, brass scattered, and a ripple of green flashed across the board far more than red. Mason exhaled through his teeth. They were actually doing it. Arya didn't watch the hits. She listened to rhythm. Every sequence of breath and trigger told her which Marine was fighting and which was flowing. She knelt beside one shooter, adjusted his foot angle by inches, and whispered, "You're still trying too hard." The second run began. Targets rose faster. Wind swung erratic, but instead of panic, the line held steady. Each Marine was no longer reacting to the range, they were conversing with it. Hart leaned over the railing, impressed despite himself. "Whatever she's teaching," he murmured to Mason. "It's contagious." Mason only nodded. That's how discipline sounds when it breathes. Afterward, Arya gathered them around the scoreboard. "Numbers don't matter yet," she said, gesturing to the green streaks. "What matters is that you heard your misses before they happened." Diaz lifted a hand, hesitant but curious. "Ma'am, you said yesterday that wind has rhythm. How do you hear it?" Arya crouched, scooped a handful of sand, and let it stream through her fingers. "When it falls straight, the air's lazy. When it drifts sideways, the air's restless. You don't listen with your ears, you watch how stillness changes shape." Her tone was soft, but the silence that followed was total. Later, back in the equipment tent, Mason found her reviewing telemetry from their sessions. "You turned theory into muscle memory in a week," he said. Arya smiled faintly. "No, they did. I just cleared the noise." Hart entered holding a thin folder marked Centurion Archive. He placed it on the table with careful reverence. "This was written by a man named Master Sergeant Chen," he said. Arya froze, eyes drawn to the faded handwriting along the margin MC-13. Hart continued. "He helped design the gauntlet 10 years ago. His notes mention a philosophy cooperation over control." She touched the initials gently, the ink half faded but unmistakable. "He taught me everything I know," she whispered. For a moment, the tent seemed smaller, filled with ghosts and gratitude. Hart studied her expression. "He never completed a perfect run. No one did until you." Arya shook her head. Then it wasn't my record. It was his lesson finishing itself. Mason looked between them, speechless. The next day, Hart gathered the unit again. Effective immediately, he announced. Cade will serve as acting instructor. She'll redesign the Centurion course using the Chen doctrine. The Marines erupted not in cheers, but murmurs of anticipation. They'd seen what she could do. Now they'd learn what she believed. Arya stepped forward, expression steady, voice clear. Then we begin by unlearning. The revised course replaced brute sequences with rhythm drills. Targets rose in unpredictable patterns, forcing shooters to rely on breath and instinct. Every session ended not with scores, but with each Marine describing what the wind had told them. By the end of the week, something remarkable happened. Diaz's team achieved 91 hits, no shouting, no luck, just flow. Hart watched from the tower and said softly, "That's the future of marksmanship." That night, Mason brought her a cup of coffee under the fading floodlights. "You've rewritten the way we think," he said. Arya answered without looking up. "I didn't rewrite it. I remembered it." He frowned slightly. "Remembered?" She nodded. Chen once said, "Perfection isn't a moment. It's the absence of resistance." That's all we're chasing here. Wind stirred through the open tent flaps, carrying sand and the faint echo of distant gunfire. Arya glanced toward the range, where faint green dots still glowed from the scoreboard. Each light was proof not of victory, but of understanding. Hart returned, the folder still in his hand. "The Commandant's seen the footage," he said. "He wants to make this a permanent training doctrine. If you stay, you'll lead the new division." Arya considered that, quiet for a long breath. "I'll stay until the rhythm no longer needs a conductor," she replied. "Then it can play itself." Outside, the night deepened. The desert wind shifted, crossing from west to east, soft but sure. Arya listened to it move, and for the first time, it sounded like home. 2 weeks later, the range no longer sounded like chaos. Rounds cracked in harmony, not in panic. Where there used to be frustration, now there was rhythm, an invisible thread tying every trigger pull together. The Marines had gathered for the final evaluation. This time, there were no spectators, no wagers, no smirks, just soldiers and rifles under the gold wash of dawn. Hart stood in the observation tower again. Same folded arms, same stillness, but the doubt was gone. Below him, Arya Cade moved along the line like a conductor, not a commander. "Remember," she said quietly, "the wind wants to help you if you let it." No one laughed. They'd learned by now that when she spoke softly, something important followed. The Centurion gauntlet had been reset to half-length 50 targets for the entire team. Their goal was unity, not perfection. Arya stepped back, raised her hand, and gave a simple nod. The first volley rolled out like a heartbeat. Steel plates sang across the distance. Not random, but melodic. Targets dropped one after another, clean and deliberate. Mason watched through binoculars, unable to hide a grin. "They're flowing," he muttered. She actually taught them to flow. Hart's eyes stayed on the board. No, she reminded them how to listen. When the last target fell, the scoreboard read 93%. No one cheered. They were too busy smiling in quiet disbelief. Arya exhaled once, calm, like she already knew the outcome. After the test, Hart called everyone to the assembly tent. The new Centurion doctrine lay projected on a large screen, bearing her name beneath Chen's. "From this day," Hart said, "these principles guide every marksman in this division." He turned to Arya. "You've done more than set a record. You've changed our definition of precision." Arya simply replied, "Precision is just awareness that learned to breathe." Mason stepped forward, holding a folded flag Chen's family had donated years earlier. He offered it to her without ceremony. "Master Sergeant Chen started this program," he said. "You completed it." Arya touched the fabric with her fingertips, tracing the stitching. "It was never unfinished," she said softly. "It was waiting." Then she folded it again, returning it to Mason's hands. Keep it with the school. It belongs here. Outside. The range lights flicked on early, painting the sand with long shadows. The wind had picked up again, gusty, unpredictable, the kind that would ruin any ordinary training. Arya stepped out into it, squinting toward the horizon. Diaz jogged up, waving his phone. "Ma'am, you need to see this." On the screen, the Marine Corps' official feed showed the Centurion footage, her 100 for 100 run. Comments flooded in respect from bases around the world, disbelief from skeptics, admiration from old veterans. Hart approached, catching the glow of the screen. "You just made history public," he said. Arya shrugged lightly. "History's only useful if it teaches." She looked out again at the line of shooters resetting for practice. No longer recruits. No longer uncertain, they moved with intent, calm and rhythm. Each one repeating the same small motions she'd taught, refined into instinct. Mason joined her, eyes on the sky. "You could stay," he said quietly. "Build something bigger." "I could," she answered. "But staying too long teaches dependence, not discipline." He nodded, understanding more than he liked. "Where will you go? Where the wind's still misunderstood," she said. By evening, the range emptied, leaving only the flags and the hum of cooling rifles. Arya packed her gear, each item placed with precision scope, tape, notebook, the same ritual as always. When she zipped the bag, it sounded final, but peaceful. Hart caught her at the gate. The commandant approved the permanent instructor role. "It's yours if you want it." Arya smiled faintly. "Then let me earn it again somewhere harder." He studied her for a moment, then saluted. Not out of protocol, but respect. She returned it quietly and walked toward the waiting vehicle. As the truck rolled down the dirt road, the last sunlight cut across the range in bands of orange and silver. Behind her, Mason raised his hand, watching until she vanished beyond the ridge. "0 isn't a number," he murmured. "It's a conversation." In the stillness that followed, the desert answered him with a whisper of wind. On the scoreboard, her name glowed beside Chen's perfect Centurion, not as a challenge, but as a reminder of what happens when silence becomes skill. The wind kept blowing across Dry Creek Range long after the lights dimmed, carrying echoes of brass and breath. And somewhere beyond the horizon, Arya Cade was already listening again, waiting for the next conversation to begin. If you enjoyed the story, consider sending a super chat to help bring more stories like this. Now, click on the video on the screen to hear another story that's just as powerful and captivating, with courage, sacrifice, and a choice that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about duty and justice.